Okay, picking up where we left off, let's say the rest of this actually is concrete as well, but compared to this is a bit more sort of complicated shape, and actually doing the sort of selection edits and stuff is a little bit of a pain in the butt. So this is another method, an alternative method, but I think works pretty good. Is using the same sort of concept as we used earlier in using a layer mask when we're cutting out people. And I'll show you how to do that. So let's make a new layer again. Keep on doing this. And rename it Conc02. So different layer again. Go back to the concrete texture that we had. It's still selected, Control A, V to move, drag, and drop it in here. Right, same thing more or less. Bring down the opacity a little bit, and we probably want to, maybe scale it a little bit. So Control T to transform, hold down Shift, and make it a little bit smaller so the scale is roughly similar to what we had before. Enter to complete the transformation and just sort of move it roughly into place. All right, so the big difference here is that I want to actually apply a layer mask, so I can actually just mask the parts out that I want. So in this case, you go down here to the lower right, this little add layer mask, which is right next to the left of the little FX symbol. So I add a layer mask. And automatically your layer mask should be active. If it's not, just make sure it's selected. So in this case, just selecting the layer isn't enough. You have to click on the box that's on the right and highlight it to make it active. All right? It's important to know. So remember, the white in a layer mask means everything is showing, and black means everything is hidden, right? So with my sort of color set to black, all I need to do is to do a paint bucket on the whole thing. And you'll see the layer mask sort of display goes to completely black, everything disappears. So what you want to do is go to, with the layer mask active, obviously, and with a sort of selection, change your color to a white, for example, right? And then if you use the paint bucket and painting, you're basically painting stuff back in. You can use a brush or you can use the paint bucket. Now you can go through that slowly, but I think it's actually a lot faster. And I'm gonna actually hide all the layers that's above the base drawing. So click and just do that. And what I want to do is actually make the base drawing active. Use the magic wand, W, right? And actually just go through and click select the parts that I think should show up. So let's see, what was that? Oh, I think that's sprayed in. Yeah, okay. So just these parts, right? Go back to the layer mask, and you still have your selections, applied, right? Use the paint bucket tool, paint. You got that all back. Let's turn everything back on and see. So basically, I'm missing some of the parts that have to do with the stairs, but besides that, it's almost. Yeah, and so I was kind of wondering what these were, but when you look at the model, that's actually part of the structure. So I'm gonna actually clean that up a little. So I just went back to the base layer and selected those portions, and I'm actually gonna color it in with a shade of gray. But if you're wondering how to get a color back that you had before, this guy, the eyedropper tool with the eye, basically, you can click it anywhere and it will basically grab the color that you're hovering over, right? So black, gray, gray, and then you can actually just use that to apply a color to your selection, something like that. So I'll do the same with the poche. So with the eyedropper tool, I'll hover over the poche color to get it, and use that as the color for the selection of these treads that I probably should have done earlier. Alright, so with that in, usually with these sort of realistic, with these materials, it'll look a little awkward at first, and that's why, you know, you usually, if it's at full opacity, it kind of pops too much. So it's usually a good idea to, you know, kind of tweak it a little bit, make it maybe a little bit semi-transparent. With the other one as well, 86, 85, you know, usually works. But you know, you play around with it. But this sort of masking method is actually a very efficient way of doing this, and you can, you know, at any time you can mask out more or less depending on what you're trying to do. All right, so let's plop in a scaly or two. So I'm making a new layer. Scalies. Okay, and I'm actually just going to open the ones that I made earlier, these two guys. Okay, if you're looking at this, probably because this is much more of a, right now at least, it's much of a sort of more monochrome image, and oftentimes, like I kind of showed you guys earlier, what I will do is, you know, take this, and even before I move it over, go to Image, Adjustments, Hue, Saturation, Control U, basically, and just pull the saturation down to almost -100. Basically, make it, or you can actually just sort of mode grayscale, which discards all the color information, make it a grayscale image. Control A, V, drag it over, drop it in, right? So it's on the scaly sort of layer. Control T to kind of scale it down to, you know, I don't know, what seems like a reasonable size. And where should he go? I don't know, maybe here. Jumping into the wall, right? Doesn't really matter. Or the other version of this, where you basically take this guy, go to Image, Adjustments, Levels, Control L, right? And you play with the levels. And in this case, we're just trying to make it so you grab the very right sort of arrow here, move it to the very right, or the left, and move it to the right, which makes it completely black. And you play with the output levels a little bit, maybe slightly gray, you know, if you want that. Say OK, Control A, Control and V, move it over, plop it in, and this is the sort of silhouette version of it. Control T, scale it down, this guy there. And the same thing, you can, if you had them on different layers, obviously you could play with the opacity separately. And actually this one came in on its own layer. So this guy, you can adjust the opacity by itself independently, or you can basically merge those two layers so they're one layer. And actually you'll have to rename it again, which is annoying. But they become tied together or linked together in this case. Alright, so that's scalies. Let's try to drop in a background for this. And you can, you know, use or find whatever background you want. I have one ready here, and you can, you know, take a photo, download one off the internet, but this is a sky. Same thing, make a new layer for it. Background, name it background, and you'll have to put it in sort of the order, right, or the right order eventually. but let's just make sure it's active for now. Go to the sky, Control A, V to move, drag, drop. Okay, so this actually is a little smaller than what we want, so obviously this is not great for image quality, but in the case of the background, it's probably fine. You don't care so much about the image quality of the background, and you can sort of scale it larger and adjust the location like this. But you'll have to move the layer down in the order so it's sitting below the base drawing. Right? Even while it's there, you can still kind of adjust the location of the clouds or whatever if you want to, right? And that starts to kind of set the tone for the overall drawing. If you're finding the sort of background image is getting too distracting, or it's sort of standing out too much, it's too sharp, you can always apply a filter to it. So go to Filter, Blur, for example, and play with both like the motion blur or the Gaussian blur. The Gaussian blur, a couple pixels, 3, 4, and apply it, which sometimes will just sort of soften things out. Or the motion blur, which is kind of fun to play with here, and mess with the amount of pixels that it actually has, and it'll sort of streak. It's probably less noticeable in this sort of cloud background, but that's something you could do. So one other thing you may want to do is to actually physically Photoshop in, or sort of Photoshop in some rays, like rays of light or sun or whatever. And it's actually pretty fun. So let's make a new layer again. And you'll notice that basically I always make a new layer for new things. So sun. And basically using the polygonal lasso tool, and you'll have to kind of like pick this angle, right? You'll kind of choose the angle, and you basically sketch or draw a region that will roughly correlate with the region where you want the rays to be shining in. And with that layer active, you switch to, let's say it's changed to a yellowish color. So yellow, light yellow, like that maybe. And then you go to your brushes, right? You use your brush, and you want to pick basically a pretty soft brush like that has soft edges. I'll just kind of tone down the size a little bit. But really, the thing is in the opacity to make it really low. So in this sort of opacity setting, set it to like 20 or 15. And sort of just really slowly sort of paint in the sort of effect that you're looking for. All right. And you can try to kind of control it like that, or like we actually showed earlier, you can actually apply a blur to it as well. So with a layer active, filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and do something maybe more substantial. Let's try 15 pixels, and deselect it. After you deselect it, you can also actually just keep on blurring it by, once you've done one of the filters once, Control F, do it again, and you'll see, okay, that softens the edges a lot more, right? Although you can always use your eraser, go to the E eraser, and same thing with opacity down, really low, 17, 15, something like that, and same thing, kind of choose a really soft brush. And you guys can't see the size probably in the capture software, but you can sort of pick away at it so it doesn't seem so unnaturally sharp or even, or basically the sort of way it ends. Taper it out, filter it through a little bit, right? So I mean, this is exaggerated obviously because this is sort of like angel halo, but you kind of get the idea. And so exactly the same thing. Well, sure, you can sort of play with opacity with it as well, make it less dominant, less noticeable, but still kind of there. But exactly the same thing applies to, and I'm making a new layer, making shadows. So looking at, let's say for example, this might want to be a more shadowed region, or here. Let's use this for now. So the same thing with the shadow layer open, use the polygonal lasso tool, approximately, let's say here to here, and that's basically this region is going to be in, we're going to try to make it a heavier shadow. So go to a dark gray, use your brush, soft one, relatively big, with a low opacity, and sort of, and obviously these sort of corners usually are a lot darker, right? And so corners can be darker, and you sort of just try to fade it out towards the end. Control D, deselect, go to filters, blur it. And after you blur it, because of the shift of the Gaussian blur, you might actually have to kind of move it a little bit, nudge it a little bit, something like that, and or even just sort of paint more into it, not with the eraser, sorry, but with your brush. Flesh it out. With the eraser, sort of soften the edges. Same thing. But generally, a good way to kind of do this is actually to basically try to bracket, the outline of the room very roughly. It doesn't have to be too precise. Very roughly, the room that you're sort of working with, and then use the brush, make it pretty big, pretty ginormous, and then you can actually do this and kind of paint a lot more sort of depth and shadow into the regions, so you'll see a bit more sort of variance in the spaces, right? And if you overdo it, you can always erase it back out, or sort of tweak the opacity a little bit. So that's that's a kind of good way to basically add shadows into regions. And maybe a little bit, some of that was a little bit too overdone here, so I'm just using an eraser with a low opacity as well to kind of clean it back out, right? So you can sort of actually manipulate that a lot. All right. Let's go online and go to, let's see, the image database here, Gobo-tree, and let's find a cactus. How about this one? Okay, I have to log in, and actually don't click on that download, click on this little arrow here, download standard image, which will then download it as a zip file, which you can then extract, because these are PSD files, right? So I'm just going to extract it into my folder and open it. So here's the cactus. Control A, V, oops. That's the watermark. So just delete that. select everything and just move it over. Ooh, gigantic cactus. Okay. Control T to free transform it. A cactus as high as your design. And you can sort of put it so it's below the base background, right? So it covers it, grows out of the ground. Like that. Now obviously you will want to rename that layer cactus just to keep things consistent. So we're going to show two more sort of finishing, I guess, tricks. One is vignetting, which is kind of a way to kind of focus the attention of your drawing into your subject and sort of black that out. You'll see it as this is sort of like an old camera effect. So I'll call this layer vignetting. Make sure it's on the very top. And basically what this is using a brush, the big brush tool. Same thing with very low opacity, like around 15 or so. Huge brush, and with it on the top layer, sort of paint out the sides. So it kind of gets that effect of, you know, those sort of old cameras and blend it in. You don't want to overdo it too much, but you can obviously sort of play with the transparencies just in case you added a little bit too much. So that's one way of kind of you know, bringing the focus back to your subject matter. And then the other one is actually a pretty cool one. It's called the sort of overlay. So I'm going to make it a new layer called the overlay layer. And this is actually the texture that we're going to use in this case. You can find a lot of these sort of online. They're sort of called, I guess they're called grunge textures. So if you Google grunge textures, you'll find a lot of these sort of textures that you can download. They're usually fairly big, and you can use these, and you'll see what I mean in a little bit. So I have one of these basically. Let's open it. Texture, right? Control A, V, same thing. Drop it in. This is pretty big. So let's just stretch it. Control T. And I'm not going to care about its aspect ratio in this case. Doesn't really matter. Control T. And with it active up here, right under the layers, which is usually normal, just change it to. You can actually try a couple of these out, but you know, something like sometimes color burn works, or the overlay works as well. Although you might have to kind of play with the sort of opacity, because that one's probably pretty bright. So I like the color burn. And just mess with the opacity a little bit. And often what that does is that it actually kind of gives your overall drawing a texture. It kind of unifies the colors and a lot of the sort of textural quality of it as well. I think in this one in particular, probably just the cactus looks a little bit out of whack. So I will actually bring down the saturation of that cactus a fair bit, so it's not so sort of green and punchy, and maybe make it a little brighter. Yeah. Okay, and that's with the cactus layer sort of active. So yeah, and you can kind of turn the layers on and off just to see the difference, and you can use one but not the other, just sort of depending on the look that you're trying to get at. But this is actually something you can experiment a lot with. All right, so that's it. this is, you know, just a quick example of like what you can do really quickly. And so you'll see examples like this, or, you know, like that. You know, this is the one we did last year, slightly different, but still with a cactus. And I've shown some of the examples before. This is one of them. Some of the more crazy ones in class, I believe. But there's a lot you can do. You know, experimenting a little bit with color and shades and gradients, things like that. Texture. So this is actually a pretty nice one. This one as well. This is really a very interesting one. It actually leaves the pochette white, but then really layers and fills in the colors in the interior spaces. This one is really well done. Yeah, so these are just some of the examples. And that's it.